Okay, this podcast is for Unit 2. We're on learning target number 6, which is the integumentary system or the skin. And this is located in Chapter 4 of your textbook. First, let's begin by talking about some basic functions of the skin. So, our skin does so much for us. It protects us from many things. It protects us from mechanical damage, in other words, bumps and cuts. It protects us from chemical damage also, any kind of contact you have with an acid or a base. Thermal damage, so heat and cold. Our skin protects us from UV radiation, bacteria, and other pathogens. And it also protects us from water loss from our body surface. Our skin regulates heat loss, and it can also excrete urea and uric acids, which are wastes. And then our skin also synthesizes vitamin D for us. All right, now we're going to look at the layers of the skin. The skin is composed of two layers. You have the epidermis and the dermis. The epidermis, which is located right here, this is the most superficial or outer layer of your skin, is made of stratified squamous. So many layers of those flat pancake-like looking cells. And this stratified squamous is a little bit special. It is capable of doing something called keratinizing, which means it produces a protein called keratin, which makes these stratified squamous cells especially hard, tough, and almost water repellent too. So if you think about the outside of your skin, that's why it's so tough, is because it is keratinized. And our epidermis is also avascular, which means that it has no blood vessels. So you can see in the image where we're looking at the epidermis, there are no blood vessels running through that epidermis. So if you've ever gotten a cut before in which you bleed, that means that the cut has gone through your epidermis and into your dermis down below. The second layer of skin is your dermis, which is the underlying layer, which you can see here in blue. This is made of dense, irregular connective tissue, so a little bit different than the dense, regular connective tissue we talked about in the beginning of the unit. You can see this is where the appendages of skin are located, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So there's a lot going on in there. You see hair follicles, you see sweat glands, oil glands, nerve endings, blood vessels. So a lot going on in there. You can see the papillary layer. The papillary layer is where our fingerprints come from. So our papillary layer is that top layer of the epidermis, and it looks all bumpy, and that's where your fingerprints come from. The reticular layer, which is the thicker part of the dermis, that's where all the appendages are located. That is also where the collagen and elastic fibers are running through. All right, next we'll talk about the hypodermis. The hypodermis, which is located right here, is subcutaneous tissue, which means it's under your skin. This is not actually considered part of your skin. It is underneath, so deep to the skin. It is mostly adipose tissue or fat. It helps to anchor your skin to your underlying organs. This is where nutrients or fat is stored. It acts as a shock absorber, so it helps to absorb some of the shock when you bump into something. So if you think about when you hit an area of your body with less adipose than the other, it's usually more painful to hit a location in your body where you have less adipose, say uh, your elbow or the back of your hand or your knee. There's not a lot of adipose there. But then if you bump against something like your thigh with a little more adipose, that helps to absorb some of the shock. And then it also insulates us and keeps us warm. Okay, so now we are zoomed in on that top layer of skin, the epidermis. So we're just looking at that very top layer, the most superficial layer of our skin. And this superficial layer is avascular. So again, there is no blood supply. Most of the cells in your epidermis are keratinocytes, which means they produce keratin, which makes this part of your skin so tough. You can see there are several layers to the epidermis. You can see the stratum corneum is the most superficial layer. The stratum basal is the deepest layer. The stratum basal is the most nourished because it is closest to the dermis, which is where the diffusion of the nutrients are coming from, where the blood vessels are. The stratum basal is also where all of the dividing cells are happening. So this is where division of skin cells is actually occurring. So what happens is the skin cells are produced in the basal cell or the basal layer, and then they slowly move their way up to the more superficial layers. By the time they reach the stratum corneum, those skin cells are super keratinized, dead, and very, very tough. This whole process of these new cells reaching the surface takes about 1 month. And again, once they reach those stratum corneum, they're dead and highly keratinized. So the only actively dividing skin cells are in the deepest layer of the epidermis known as the stratum basal. So if you're following along in your notes right now, you have a link to this video and it shows this process of skin regeneration happening. Okay, on to the color of skin. So 3 pigments contribute to skin color. You have melanin, keratin, and hemoglobin. Melanin is located in the epidermis, and there are 2 different types of melanin. There's the melanin that produces the darkness of skin, and then you have another type of melanin that produces things like freckles. So these are produced by the melanocytes, which you can see down here. They almost look kind of like spiders. They are found in the stratum basal, so the deepest layer of the epidermis. The more melanin that is produced by those melanocytes, the darker the skin. And sun exposure actually produces more melanin. That's why people can actually get a tan when they're in the sun. And these melanocytes form melanosomes, which you can see in the image are those little dark pockets of melanin. And what those melanosomes do is they're taken up by the neighboring skin cells and it shields our DNA from the sun. So the more melanin that you have, the more protection you have against the sun's UV rays. So a person with very fair skin has less protection because they have less melanin, and then a person with very dark skin has more protection because they have more melanin. Another pigment is called keratin. Keratin gives you that an orangish shade to your skin, and this can actually be influenced by what you eat. So if you've ever heard of a baby consuming too many carrots and their skin actually turning a little bit orange, that's actually a true thing that can happen. And then hemoglobin um, gives the skin a pink or a reddish hue. It's easiest to see in people with very fair skin, and this is the protein that carries oxygen around your body, so it's found in the blood vessels. Okay, you also have linked to this video, The Science of Skin Color. While skin color in great detail is not on your test, this is a great video to watch because it's so interesting. It shows where all the different shades of skin color came from. These are some coloring of the skin issues that you could see on different people. So erythema is when there is a red color to the skin, kind of like you see in that image there, that can be caused by many different things. Pallor just simply means pale, so if somebody is losing the color of their skin. Jaundice is when you see a yellowish or sometimes even a bluish tint. I'm sure you've seen bruises before. That's when your skin has a blackish or bluish color to it in a certain spot because of a broken blood vessel. And then cyanosis is when the skin is blue. Usually occurs in fingertips or toes, and that's when there's a lack of oxygen in the blood. All right, guys, tomorrow we will begin with this slide. We will do a cross section of the skin together to review the information from this Ed puzzle today. See you tomorrow.